Welcome, everybody, to the Acronis virtual conference, Top 5 Secrets to Preventing Cyber Attacks in Microsoft 365 Environments in 2021. My name is James Slaby, and I'm delighted to open the event today. I'll be your host and moderating the panel that is at the center of our event. Before we get kicked off, just a few housekeeping notes to share. The conference is being recorded, and we will email you a link to the event, that recording afterwards, so you can share it with colleagues who couldn't be here today, maybe review some information that you'd like to share with them as well. Your microphone will be muted throughout the event, but we strongly encourage you to submit your questions through the Zoom Q&A interface. We've reserved some time for our amazing panel to answer your questions directly. We have a great lineup of speakers from around the world here with very interesting and different perspectives on today's subject. The agenda is pretty simple. I don't want to spend too much time talking myself. Sometimes I open these things with a few remarks about cybersecurity trends and statistics. I'm going to skip that today so that we can get right today to our panel. I will note that we appear to have reached kind of a tipping point in the cybersecurity threat world. For instance, I've been writing and speaking about the ransomware threat for maybe 4 or 5 years now. And thanks to the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack in the US, I expect that when I talk about my job at a cocktail party, people from outside of tech are actually going to have an inkling of what I'm talking about and not immediately look over my shoulder for someone else to talk to. So I guess that's progress of a sort. Also, if you are messaging around these kind of attacks, the bad guys keeping ransomware and other large-scale attacks in the news every day kind of makes the job a little bit easier. Very interesting times that we live in. We're going to take about 40 minutes with our panel. We'll go then to your questions live. We'll have a very brief demonstration of Acronis CyberProtect, which is the technology that our partners bring to market to address many of the challenges that we're going to talk about today. And then I hope you'll stick around for after that. I've got a promotion for our partners to tell you about that I think is very interesting, and a few other resources to share with you for your education and help in making your case about the opportunity to address some of the issues around Microsoft environments that we're going to talk today. Manning our Q&A console today are two of our amazing solutions engineers. We really have a fantastic global staff there. We've got Cornel Heikop from our Netherlands office and Mohammed Khaled from our Dubai office. They're standing by to answer some of your questions, and they'll be passing some of your questions along to me to present to our panel in the Q&A. Promise you, if we don't get to your question live on the air, we'll follow up with you directly to make sure you get an answer to that. So the idea of today's panel is to share some of their insights on how you can amplify your own skills and experience with the right processes and tools to build sustainable, profitable, high-growth MSP services business. You will get an operational checklist to take home with you on how to build a broad range of exactly these sort of services. So let me introduce our speakers today. First off is my esteemed colleague, Candid Wurst. He's Acronis' Vice President for Cyber Protection Research, and someone I learn something new from every day. I suspect he's forgotten more about cyber threats than I will ever know. Candid previously worked for more than 16 years as the tech lead for Symantec's global security response team. He's a widely published author, a favorite with the tech media, and a frequent speaker at big time conferences like RSA and Area 41. Welcome, Candid.
Hey, thanks, James.
Also very pleased to welcome Troy Hunt. He's a globally known security researcher and creator of HaveIBeenPwned.com, which I suspect most of our audience has heard of. That's the service that aggregates information about data breaches and lets you do a quick search to discover if your credentials have been stolen everywhere. If you haven't visited that, I strongly urge you to do so immediately after this conference and get your family to do so too. Welcome, Troy.
Thank you very much for having me.
Really pleased to have you aboard. Next up is Scott Becker. He's the editorial director of Redmond Channel Partner, a publication I imagine many of you follow for great information about what's going on in the Microsoft world. He's also the editorial director for Converge 360 and a bunch of other IT media properties, including Virtualization and Cloud Review, Application Development Trends, and Visual Studio Magazine. Scott's covered news and trends in enterprise IT and the IT channel for more than 20 years. Very happy to have you here, Scott.
Thanks. Glad to be here, James.
Last but hardly least is Keytron Evans. He's a cybersecurity and workforce development expert with over 17 years of experience in pen testing, incident response, and InfoSec management for both federal agencies and Fortune 500 companies. He's the principal security researcher at the InfoSec Institute, where he empowers the human side of cybersecurity with cyber knowledge and skills to outsmart cybercrime. Welcome, Keytron.
Thank you very much, James.
All right. I love having a panel with people from different corners of the cybersecurity profession and from all over the world. I think the last time I did an event like this, I had 6 experts competing for airtime. We only have 4 today, and I'm actually grateful for that because it gives you all a little bit more breathing space for your viewpoints here and a chance to show off your different perspectives on the questions we're going to examine here, including our audience Q&A. Audience, please use the Q&A. So let's jump right to our questions. Kind of cutting to the chase of the real purpose of this event. What Microsoft-oriented services do you believe that small and medium-sized businesses, which is kind of the core audience for our MSP partners in their delivery of services based on Acronis technology, what do you think those SMBs are looking for to help with their Microsoft environments from their MSPs? Anybody can jump in here. We've got some time.
Well, I can tell you from my experience and the feedback that I'm getting that most of them have reached a point of where, you know, they're afraid of the things that they're hearing in the news. They don't want to be the next organization to be on the news. And they're really just looking, what I'm hearing from them, they want the MSPs to truly be a partner and take some of the work off. Some of the mistakes that I see MSPs make is they come with great solutions and great products, but then when they implement it into the customer, it actually creates more work for the customer. So one of the things I'm hearing is we would like for our MSPs to think about making less work for us, making it easier for us to compute and operate securely. So I think the MSPs that figure that out are the ones that are going to be very successful in the future.
Here.
Yeah, I definitely agree as well. I mean, the customers did definitely, let's say, search for a solution which can cover everything without any human interaction, right? I mean, that's the dream, having just install it, forget about it, and it's protecting you. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. But what I hear from a lot of MSPs is that the customers and also the sys administrators at the MSPs, they're kind of fed up with all the different kind of point solutions that they have and try to bring those together, right? Because IT is getting more and more complex. If you try to have a hybrid cloud environment and now you have remote workforce and everything, right? So you need to make it efficient and easy to use. And at Acronis, we actually did a survey about 2 months ago, and the people responded that 21% of the organizations use more than 10 different security consoles. I mean, 1 in 5, more than 10 consoles, right? Just think about how to make sure that you're not missing anything.
That's a lot of glass.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, just to jump piggyback there on what Keytron and Candid were saying is that, you know, people are looking for that single solution, and it may be unrealistic, you know, for the SMB to find it, but really the MSP can be that person, you know, like they can be that single point, and that's really what a lot of SMBs are looking for. You know, a lot of them don't have IT departments, or you know, they'd really like the SMB or the MSP to supplement their organization and just be their IT department. And and now as security becomes more important, as it really gets in the news, in the way, James, you were talking about, the cocktail party level, of the colonial pipeline, they'd really like sort of one person to go to, one throat to choke. If they have a problem, they want to know their MSP has it handled. Their MSP, they're not calling the MSP who's saying, here's what you need to do this, this, and this. The MSP is doing it or handling it before they even hear about it.
I think what Scott said there is very true as well. Organizations are somewhat expecting to fall into the pit of success. And what's particularly difficult at the moment is the landscape is changing so quickly, and there's so much new and diverse attack vectors that we're seeing for organizations. Like, how do they stay on top of this? I'm sympathetic for those in organizations at the moment who have to try and figure this stuff out. And I think they're looking out there for help, and they're looking for others to be able to somewhat delegate these challenges to.
Yeah, I often talk about the global shortage of cybersecurity talent. I think Cybersecurity Ventures, a research firm in the US, projected that there'll be 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity engineering positions by the end of this year. And you think about a poor small and medium business trying to compete for that kind of talent against large enterprises, government institutions, presumably a life of lucrative crime, and also tech providers who can offer them better pay, more interesting projects that'll help them develop their skills over time. If I'm a young cybersecurity tech just coming out of university and looking for my first job, I'm probably not going to choose an SMB first, but a tech provider that's going to offer me a kind of a more interesting, challenging, and skills expanding career path. So I think SMBs are at the back of that line and really desperate for the kind of help that managed service providers can deliver. Any other thoughts on that before we move on?
Yeah, maybe adding, as Scott said, that's exactly where MSPs can come in and help, because it's not expected for the SMBs, the small, mid-size businesses, to have that knowledge or kind of being able to hire the right talents to do it, right? But having someone to tell you about, let's say, even just the best practices, right? You mentioned ransomware there with DarkSide. Just looking at Ireland at the moment, where this week the national healthcare system has been attacked. And if you remember, it's nearly about 4 years on the dot that WannaCry was going rampant in the UK. So you would have thought that people have learned a little bit from it. But on one end, they haven't. And on the other, as Troy said, the attackers, they do learn. So they come with new avenues to get in. And unfortunately, that's a challenging point. But that's exactly where you need those partners that you can trust and say, hey, how do I enable two-factor authentication? How can I protect myself against supply chain attacks and so on? Because those are the things that do matter.
Yeah, we have the luxury of focusing on that full time. Imagine being a business that, following the tech really isn't part of their brief. So a tremendous opportunity, I think, for our partners here. All right, let's move along here. So what challenges can MSPs help their Microsoft using customers around data breaches? I know there's a lot of expertise on this panel here on that particular topic, especially now that new tactics are being brought to bear by ransomware gangs like data exfiltration. Steal data first before you trigger the encryption attack, and then threaten to leak it if they don't quickly pay the ransom. Now that's obviously a bigger deal than ever. So what can you tell our audience about the challenges that small businesses are facing around breaches?
Hey, if it's data breaches, I'm happy to kick off on that one. So I think one of the first challenges is
you're our most famous expert on that.
I do think about it a little bit. I think one of the big challenges here is organizations so frequently struggle to identify breaches as they're in progress. And I think it's fascinating to look at how much data can be exfiltrated from an organization before they actually realize what's going on. And very often the first time that they actually realize something has gone on is when either I call them, you never want to get a call from me, or when you appear in the news somewhere else. So I think one of the things we can do here is focus more on how do we identify the very early indicators of compromise, because we're very, very poor at doing that. And then if we look at sort of the other end of the life cycle of a data breach, how do we recover from this? So how do we deal with this thing once it has happened? And I kind of feel like we're at a point now where data breaches are no longer exceptional in and of themselves. And what we're more judging organizations by is how they respond to these incidents. So we can all think of incidents that we have seen in the news where the organizations maybe not responded so well to these incidents, and that in itself becomes newsworthy. So I would love to see more support for organizations to communicate efficiently, truthfully, transparently with their customers, and to minimize the damage once it happens. This is assuming that they weren't able to identify it earlier and actually stop it.
Yeah, I think excellent points there, as you say. Crisis management and communication, unfortunately, still is very bare, right? It's usually the, oh, nothing happened, and then it's the, oh yes, but we take privacy very seriously. I mean, you have to go one step further.
We take security very seriously, is in every press communication about these things, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course,
except that we got breached.
Yeah. But I think your first point is excellent as well on the visibility, right? Now that many organizations have moved to the cloud during the pandemic, many cloud services, we still see a lot of Amazon S3 buckets, unfortunately also with Azure Cloud, which are badly configured so that anyone can access the data. And very often the company does not even log it. So even if you come and say, hey, we see that your data is on the dark web, they probably can't even do the forensics and say how much was stolen, when was it stolen, because they just lacking getting the logs. And I mean, Microsoft does provide those log files. It's just a matter of setting them up and ingesting it. So unfortunately, yeah, still some work to do, I guess.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that too. One of the things that I see is we always quote the numbers to Troy's original point of how long it takes before the organization knows they've been breached. And the common number that we hear is like 100 days, right? But the thing that we don't take into account is if you took that and broke it down and said, let's just count that for small and medium business, it's more like 260 days, because it's all lumped in together. Because when we look at 100 days, we're talking about massive enterprises that have millions of dollars a year worth of equipment and people just looking for these things. So if you look at a small to medium business, they don't have those resources. And to the point that Candid made about the cloud, part of that is when we were marketing cloud to small to medium businesses, we sold them on the idea that, like, look, if you migrate everything to cloud, you don't have to worry about any of it. Security, everything's going to be automatically taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about it. And a lot of the truth got lost in translation there, because I think a lot of the SMBs have this misconception that their security responsibility got transferred to their cloud service provider when that SMB helped them migrate to cloud. So I think there's a lot of winding back that we're going to have to do to help them identify, where responsibility actually lies. And with that, I think to Troy's point, we will get increased visibility, which should get us, a better response mechanism going forward.
Yeah, and I'll just say thanks to Troy and Candid, especially because you've just given me an idea for an article that I need to work on, which is, MSPs often serve as, an SMB's only IT department, but a lot of SMBs don't have great PR departments either. So I think what would be helpful is if MSPs also have some messaging best practices, so that if an SMB does suffer a breach, how they should communicate with their customers and how they should communicate with the public about that breach. A lot of the ones that you hear about are obviously Fortune 2000 companies with huge communication staffs and a lot of budget on that side. So just an interesting nugget. I appreciate that. and just to what Kitron was saying is that, one thing to add is just, I think it's really helpful for MSPs to spend a lot of time with the Microsoft shared responsibility model and really understand the different layers of that. And there are elements of it that are surprising. as far as what's on the customer and MSP responsibility side versus what the CSP, in this case, Microsoft takes care of. And so not only spending time understanding it, but also spending some time with the customer to make sure that they understand where those responsibilities lie.
It's interesting. I just got back to the office here in Boston, in the US for the first time in nearly a year and a half recently. But of course, we've noted that the shift to remote work, which is going to be with us for a while, opens up some new vulnerabilities there as well. I always shudder to think about all the cruddy consumer grade home routers for whom the default management admin password has never been changed. And I suspect that's going to be with us for a while yet. All right. This is a subject that ought to strike fear into the heart of every business from large enterprises on down, which is the notion of tech, software, supply chain, tech and other software supply chain attacks. So the famous or notorious one here, of course, is the SolarWinds breach that news broke of late last year. And it seems like there's a new one of those emerging kind of on a weekly basis. So bad enough that we had to fend off cyber criminals, but now nation states aren't just going after each other with cyber weapons. They're targeting businesses and government institutions as well. And we're not cocky about it. We understand at Acronis that if someone with the arsenal that large nations have to go after you, it's going to be very difficult to fend them off with their unlimited time and budget and resources to go after a particular target. But I wonder if our panel could comment on what lessons that Microsoft customers and the tech providers that serve them should be taking away from these kind of advanced persistent threat attacks that have now shifted to include not just governments, but businesses and smaller, like local government institutions.
I mean, I would even broaden it up and say it's not only just nation state actors that are using software supply chain attacks. We see it being used by classical cyber criminals as well. As Troy said, they're just using it because it works. It's one of the quote unquote best ways to get into a highly secure environment because it's using a trusted relationship with you. The code might be signed and still trusted. So that's why it got in. And SolarWinds is just one, right? I mean, CCleaner, Natsarang, Asus, more recently Click Studio, a password manager, they had a software supply chain attack. I mean, getting into a password manager, that's gonna give a few juicy, more database entries to Troy, right? That's the thing that you don't really want to have happen. So what's the lessons learned? I'd say, and it might sound a bit cynical, everybody can get breached, or anyone. I mean, if there's enough effort, they will find the way to get into it, right? Luckily for Microsoft, they use a zero trust approach. So they admitted that some people managed to get some read access to some code, but it was only read access. Just imagine if they wouldn't have had the visibility, had those zero trust models in place, if someone managed to kind of add some code to, I don't know, Microsoft Teams or anything else and ship it, that could have been even more devastating. So I think it's make sure that you know who you're trusting. So any open source library that you use for your own development, any small tool, being it VLC, Vita drivers, or Notepad++. And I'm not saying that those are bad companies. I'm just saying that there are a lot of small tools that we all use that might get compromised, right? And you need to be aware of those. And then it's the second step, like Scott said, do you have the visibility? Would you actually notice if that specific update just starts to pinging out to strange ideas and exfiltrating 2 terabytes of data? Most cases, probably not.
Yeah, and I would add to that too. One of the things that I see happen a lot with the whole supply chain thing is when these exfiltrations and things like that start to happen, I know I teach it, and I know Troy teaches as well. You have to have your people trained up on proper response and how to deal with when you are breached, because generally what we see in SMBs is when a data breach happens, people are just running around, it's just total pandemonium. And part of my job as a consultant, when I come in, usually the first day is just calming everybody down and saying, look, chill out, this happens, you're not the only one this happened to. But I think it's important to make sure your people are trained up, because I shared in the last panel that we did when we did this last week that the messiest incident response effort I've ever led was a very large MSP that was a service to thousands of other companies. And they had a data breach where their code was compromised, and it compromised all of their customers. So it was in its own right a supply chain type of breach as well. And what made it so messy is you had the MSP advising all the customers on incident response, and they were about half the information they were giving them was the absolute opposite of what they should have been doing in that response. So it was an exponentially growing issue. You know, the minute they would push out an instruction, exponentially that wrong instruction was a million times worse than if it were just one organization. So I think with MSPs specifically, you need to make sure that you're the core. As Candace said earlier, a lot of times, or as Scott said earlier, a lot of times the MSPs are the only IT department for some of the SMBs. So you need to make sure you're solid on, if anything, on the incident response stuff, you know, so that when these supply chain things do come down, because I believe that the supply chain thing that we saw with Microsoft and with SolarWinds, that is the model for APTs now because of how successful both of those were.
Yeah, and
Troy,
I'll just,
no,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to try to get you to respond, and you were way ahead of me.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great points. And, you know, and also, in that specific incident, there were some things, as far as, password security and other basic lessons, lessons learned from that incident. But I guess, my sort of contrarian view is, for the average MSP, it's this kind of supply chain attack is kind of like being a spectator or sort of a person on the street in a superhero movie where there's a huge battle going on between Superman and some giant villain, and you're just trying not to get stepped on, because it's these are companies with huge security budgets and huge security processes and extremely sophisticated attackers, and it's just like there's not much to do other than watch and look for the guidance from the federal agencies about what to do once it happens. And hopefully it's a wake-up call, but there have been a lot of wake-up calls for many years, and security does not seem to be going away. It's a ever complexifying issue, if that's a word.
I'll accept that.
I think we need to recognize too how broad this one term is. We say supply chain, and SolarWinds is obviously one of the very recent memory incidents, and it's nation state, and it's according to the Americans, it's the Russians as well, which is probably right, and it sounds very scary and it's very large scale. But we've had these attacks in one way or another for many, many years as well. And very often they can be very, very simple ones. And one that comes to mind for me is several years ago, there was an attack against an online service called BrowserLoud, and it did accessibility services. And you would take one line of JavaScript and you'd put this one line of JavaScript in your website, and it would embed JavaScript from the BrowserLoud service. And someone got access to that, and they put CoinHive at the top of the JavaScript. And this was, as far as I know, remains an unsolved crime. We don't know who did it, but it was literally like a little bit of JavaScript in a JavaScript file. And then within the same scope of supply chain, we have the Russians hacking SolarWinds. So it's just really interesting how broad this scope is. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in the middle there too.
Absolutely. That's why I say cybercriminals are using it. I mean, there was a similar case as well where instead of cryptocurrency miners, they injected form jacking or mage cards, right, to steal credit cards from your online shopping. And as there are that many small advertising and helping JavaScripts that you use in your website, I mean, do you always verify that no one modified any of those JavaScripts? You probably should, but in the dynamic world, many do not. So.
But then how do you do it? This is the challenge, because now we push the burden back on the organizations consuming these services. And on the one hand, you're saying, hey, go and use our online service because everything's packaged up and it's like you put the JavaScript on your website and then you're unburdened. You can go and do the other things. And then on the other hand, we're saying, well, you really should just make sure you watch it the whole time and make sure that nothing changes. And we do have some good technologies in the middle there as well, but I just think it puts an enormously large amount of burden back onto enterprises. And I'm sympathetic for those who have to deal with those two opposing objectives.
I agree. It's not a simple task to solve. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't be an issue, right? If it would just be one button. But as you say, there are some technology that you can apply to kind of lock it down. And I'd say, yeah, do you really need to dynamically update all the JavaScripts from, let's say, those helper widgets that you use in your browsers for the website? Probably not. So a lot of them can actually be static, and you just roll out maybe every month, every second month, the next update. But that, I agree, will generate an extra working step for them. So it goes back to, it's not something that small SMBs can handle, right? That's where you need a trusted partner like an MSP doing it for you and doing it the right way. But if you have a better idea, I think, yeah, lots of people would love to hear it, yeah.
If I had a better idea, I'd make a lot more money out of it, but no.
But you're famous, Troy. That's you've gotten fame out of this. You know, money isn't everything. You've got a
here. Maybe from other people's transgressions, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm the kind of fanboy that's going to ask for your autograph after this thing. So, but that's my world. I want to take advantage of Candid's point to segue into our next topic. But first, I want to remind the audience to please submit your questions via the Q&A. We've got time reserved for you to query our panel directly, so please take advantage of that. So we've talked about a bunch of tools already to address some of the threats that we've raised. We've highlighted against the Microsoft environment here, increasing your visibility. Keytron talked about the importance of incident response, which, I'm a really strong believer in that. Sensitivity and focus on breaches. I wonder if you could talk about some of the other kind of cybersecurity tools that you think MSPs should be taking advantage of as they seek to build a suite of services to protect their customers' Microsoft environments.
Yeah, I can start on that. I think one thing is, we kind of have to back up, and as specifically when we migrate to like a Microsoft cloud, whether it be, SaaS, Office 365, or if we're doing some type of infrastructure migration, one of the complaints that I hear a lot from organizations is, look, we migrated to cloud and we've lost all our visibility. We don't have the logs we used to have. We don't have this. And a lot of times when I go in and consult with them, I just go through line item by line item and say, well, actually, you do still have access to these logs. Here's where you find them in AWS, or here's where you find them in Azure. So I think a lot of it has to do with not so much looking for a lot of different tools, but just slowing down and taking the approach of, okay, we're in a completely new environment. Let's try to learn this environment, because a lot of the things that we're saying we're missing are actually there. We just don't know where to get them. And I think SMBs struggle with that. And I believe MSPs could be positioned quite well to kind of be that mediator, as Candid was saying earlier, to, he mentioned a great point about some of the logs that are available from Microsoft that people just don't know that are there. So I've seen organizations completely re-engineer their incident response because they think logs are not there when the logs are actually there, and actually easier to get than they were before they migrated to cloud.
Yeah, and I think it kind of drills down to know what you're actually already using, right? You said environment, since we're talking about Microsoft 365 environments here, knowing what you actually pay for. And of course, not everyone can have an E5 contract and everything with all the super ATP defenders and everything. But usually there are a few features which the MSP might not yet be using or not be aware of, right? So if you look at identity, you can of course use the Azure Identity Protection to kind of get rid of a few of the weak passwords, enforce multi-factor authentication, all the things which can help you down the line. if you have that feature. The same goes for patching, right? Microsoft makes advances here to make it easier to roll out patches, not just for Microsoft environments, but of course also for all those small applications that I mentioned. And I think it's very often you don't need the super next generation, I don't know, new tool on the block. There's a lot of existing tools have been there for 10 years, which already do a very good job in removing the basics that you need. And if you cannot handle passwords, right? If you don't use two-factor authentication for at least your critical passwords, if everyone is still using administrative rights on every box, then maybe fix that first before you try to go into kind of the next level.
Yep.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think Candide's making some great points. There's a real large delta in cost between the E3 license and the E5 license in the Microsoft stack. There's good security tools available on the E3 side, and there's great security tools once you get to E5, but there's sort of a gray area in between. It's not just sort of either or. There are some Microsoft packages that you can buy sort of on a one-off basis, but then there's also third-party tools that kind of bridge that gap. I know Acronis has a few, and others do as well, but it's kind of there can be a good way to sort of bolster that security without going all the way up to the E5 price point, which can be a sort of a showstopper for a lot of customers.
Yeah, maybe outing myself as a fanboy there as well. I mean, use services like the haveibeenpwned.com, right? To actually check, because it's a service, it's free. So why wouldn't you use it, right? To figure out, hey, I actually have 10 accounts from my company's domain, which are out there somewhere, and probably it's worth checking those and then change it, right? So use the available tools together with the ones that you paid for to at least have the basics, and cover things like identity and kind of patch management, and of course visibility. I think if you can cover those three, you're already ahead of the average.
Yeah, I agree.
Good response.
And I'm sure the web server can handle the traffic, so go and hit that server.
That's fine. It's all cloud. I'll just get the bill for it. It'll be fine.
All right. I work for a company that makes cybersecurity tools, so forgive me if I have a tendency to view the solution to every problem as adding tools, but we of course know that there's much more to it than that, and particularly for our MSP partners, there's a lot more in terms of wraparound services and value that they can deliver besides, vulnerability scanning and patch management or anti-malware capabilities. I expect this panel has some strong opinions about things like training and consulting and other opportunities around Microsoft 365 environments for their SMB customers and prospects. What do you think, guys? I know we've got some trainers and consultants.
Well, I'll jump in first because I have the least to say about it. User training, I think is really important. I'm sure Troy and Kitron will go into that a lot more. I don't think you can do phishing tests too often. I guess the one caveat I'd say is just avoid getting yourself in the headlines. I saw something recently about a company. They made news because their phishing test email was about bonuses. It was just really nasty.
This is like a way to get your end users hating you so that when you need their help in the real crisis, you're screwed.
Exactly.
Hackers would never do that, would they?
No, clearly not. But I'll stop there.
But I mean, I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Where we have these discussions about simulated phishing, and it's like, where is the moral or ethical line? And we sit here as like responsible citizens trying to figure this out, and hackers are just like, I don't care. It's like, what makes me the money? Like that's all I care about. So that is an interesting dilemma, isn't it? I don't know there's a very clear answer for that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, those awareness trainings are tough as well, because you teach them to kind of recognize the link going somewhere, and then they receive something with an attachment, right? So there's just so many avenues, or kind of moving over to text messages on mobile phones, right? And they completely forget about all the phishing training that they had. But I still think it is worth doing those awareness trainings. And Acronis, with Acronis Academy, we are a strong believer in sharing the knowledge and kind of educating people. But it has to be kind of a combination of technical controls and those, let's say, awareness trainings, because you will never have 100% eradicated every, let's say, inquisitive user trying to click on, oh yes, I never played the lottery, but sounds like I won, right? I mean, we all know at least one person who would open any email regardless of the awareness training.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always kind of held a position that, you know, when we do awareness training, we have to have a way to validate, you know, the effectiveness of it. Like, is it actually working? And if it's not, maybe we need to adjust. But I also like to add to that too, that we can't forget about training the front line, the technical people, you know, our IT and web app and developers in DevSecOps and those things, because a lot of times things get missed because of that missing piece. You know, we spend so much effort on training the end users and, you know, do end user awareness training, but we forget the fact that our technical front line, those people need training too. Just very basic things. If you go and ask the average IT person, what does a cross-site scripting attack look like and who does it primarily affect? You know, just basic questions like that. They don't know. It's just because these are terms that they've heard about, but they haven't been trained on it and trained to look for it. So I think that when we say training, we have to make sure we include our technical front end as part of that training, you know, idea or package, because otherwise you're just fixing the two ends and the middle is staying all mushy and you're still going to have things going on that nobody's aware of until, you know, that's how we stay at that 100-day detection delta, is we're not getting the technical people trained up on what they should be looking for.
Yeah, I would add that, you know, don't forget your senior leadership in that training. I don't relish the prospect of going to my CEO, who is this big, scary, shaven-headed genius, and saying, look, Sergey, I know you're processing 5,000 messages a day from 10 different apps, but could you please be careful about what you click on? That's not a fun job for anyone. But given the kind of targeting up the chain of organizations for the people that actually have the power to move money or have access to sensitive systems, intellectual property, and so forth, can't leave those folks out.
For sure.
And the attackers are, of course, getting better, right? So they use the data which was leaked in Facebook, LinkedIn, Clubhouse, or any of those recent data breaches or leaks, whatever you want to call it. They use that to personalize their messages, right? So it's no longer the badly written emails. Well, they still exist, but some of them are well written. They have a personal kind of address. They have a context. So it's quite convincing. And I mean, even I admit, I'm ordering so much stuff online at the moment that if I see one of those DHL, FedEx, whatever delivery messages, at first moment, I think, oh yeah, another delivery. Till I realize, no, that's actually just the phishing emails. So they are getting better.
Yeah, for sure. A couple of years ago, I was working with a venture capital firm that had a suit against their CPA, their accounting firm, and it was because the CPA firm got phished, and the Office 365 actually caught it and put it in the spam or this is a bad email type of folder, but the Office 365 administrator said, "Oh no, it's a good email, so let's go ahead and put it out." So it went to the CPA person, and it was basically an email with an instruction to wire a couple $1 billion to some random startup. So the CPA firm just did it because these $2, $3, $6 billion transactions are something they do 20 times a day on behalf of these VC firms. So they just did it. You know, they did the transaction because this VC firm is known for funding a lot of startups. So the transaction went through, and now the VC firm came back and we had to do a whole investigation, and it turns out that, well, yeah, it was a very, very well, they actually copied an email like that was a legitimate one and modified it just a little bit. And it was literally the IT person, the O365 administrator, that took it out of the junk or spam folder and put it back into the inbox. That was the catalyst for that happening. So yes, these attacks are, we've been saying it for years. They're getting very, very, very specific with how they're doing it. And even Candid, when InfoSec first started their phishing, big phishing campaign internally, I probably got phished like once a week, and it was usually with the your Amazon delivery has arrived type of things there. So absolutely, we have to be diligent on that.
Yeah, somewhere in my archives, I've got an email that almost phished me. Very convincing, looking like it came from my university alumni association. So I'm not moving millions of dollars on a daily basis. I do that maybe twice a year tops. But they're still going after little fish like me too.
Yeah.
All right. I think we should move on because we've got some audience questions coming in. I want to get to one more topic before we get to our audience questions. And this is, what other services should MSPs be offering, maybe beyond, Acronis's narrow focus of interest on cybersecurity and data protection? What other services might they offer to help their customers get the most value out of their Microsoft environments?
I mean, I can kick it off, but leave it to the others. I'd say educate them on the services which are there, right? Keitron just made a good example that the Office 365 has some good anti-spam, anti-phishing capabilities. You just have to configure them and adapt it. So maybe helping configuring the services that you already use. And then, of course, down to the line, as we mentioned as well, incident response and even crisis communication. So what happens if, do you actually have a disaster recovery plan that works, right? Have you tested it? Play those out and actually do it so that if something happens, you stay calm as well, and you don't have to wait for Keitron to tell you to stay calm, right? If you have a checklist, just go through it. So helping prepare you for the worst, I think, is one thing.
Yep, I agree 100%. And maybe just making sure that, you have tools that are speaking to making things easier for them. And again, I would say to Acronis and others, look at it from the perspective of your customer. Are you making their job easier, or are you just giving them more cool stuff? Because getting more cool stuff sounds fun, but after about a week, once the coolness and newness wears off of it, you realize you just have another task added to your limited staff that you have as an SMB in the first place. So I would say definitely focus on tools that consolidate some of the other things that are really spread out.
I'll jump on that, making things easier for the customer. And also, with the idea of the question of sort of, expanding beyond maybe security. I think Microsoft is guilty of something that the entire industry is right now, where everything is artificial intelligence. But I mean, a lot of the AI stuff is really just slick automation. And it goes beyond what, and I mean slick as in very good, improving and increasingly valuable. And it goes beyond, just tech management tools to, actually running the business. So, chatbots, just ways to help companies, increase their efficiency, improve their customer service through that kind of automation. There's real opportunities in that right now for MSPs as well.
I think just extending on Candid's point before, the drilling of exercise as well. Like I regularly lament how much organizations will drill disaster recovery, but they won't drill data breach response. And they're both a little bit the same. Like, you really don't want either of these things to happen to you, but you practice and you prepare. And if they do happen later on, then you can respond to them in a more efficient manner. I'd love to see more of that. And I've seen very, very few incidents, but I have seen a few where organizations have done that. And it's just a fundamentally different outcome compared to those who've never even thought about it.
Absolutely.
I'll close with observing that if a million of our MSP partners customers bought our technology because it was cool, I would not complain, but hopefully they're actually getting real utility out of that too. All right, awesome discussion, gents. Want to move to some audience questions here. Attendees, please keep submitting those via the Zoom Q&A interface. We've got one that was specifically aimed to our star celebrity panelist, Troy Hunt. It's Have I Been Pwned is a fantastic service. Can't argue there. I sent it to my family this morning. Do you think we should be doing more as an industry to educate the consumer? Yeah, we've been talking about businesses all day, but what about consumers? The way business leaders of the future, that way, business leaders of the future will be more savvy when they grow up, I guess. What do you think?
Look, I'd like to say yes, and I keep bringing it back to my parents. So if I think about my parents, they're early 70s, there's some degree of tech savviness. They're I mean, maybe mostly representative of the broader consumer. And I think about, like, how do I try and convey information to them? How do I educate them? And I think the big challenge here a lot of the time is, how do we convince other people that there's value in things like, if we take the lessons from Have I Been Pwned, how do we educate them that there is value in having a password manager and not reusing your password? Because they see friction, they see something new that they have to do compared to something they're very familiar with, using that same terrible password everywhere. And it just gets them through the door as fast as possible. So I would love to see more education, but I think we've got to do a better job at selling security. So the way I've sold it, and I'm halfway there. I have my father on a password manager, not my mother yet, but hey, 1 out of 2 ain't bad. So I'll sell it on the basis of not just, it's going to stop you getting hacked kind of stuff, but hey, look at how easy it is to log on to a website with a password manager, particularly when you're using like an iPhone or something. You're just like Face IDing in, and it's biometrically auto-completing everything. This is a really nice way of using a system. So I think we need more education here, but we've got to think about how we do it in a way that people actually want to buy into the proposition that we're presenting them.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm impressed that you've got your elderly folks down that path. My late dad was hopeless, and my mom is a little bit better, but that's a struggle. And of course, I imagine all of us are the personal IT departments for our families, so we know what that's like. All right, let's move on to another audience question here. I want to get to a couple of them in the time we've got. I alluded to the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack as one of a kind of a growing number of critical infrastructure attacks, and one of our audience members has identified that. How should MSPs address these kind of stories, whether it's in as a marketing opportunity, or say something they can address in their incident response plans, for instance? It's kind of a broad question, but I think an interesting one, especially given the news lately.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I think all of these are, teachable moments. So it's just an opportunity to come back out to the customer and have a conversation about something that they should be doing, and maybe it's an opportunity to get them on the right path.
Yeah, and talk to them about the attack kill chain, right? As we mentioned earlier, see if they have at least some filtering on email vector, if they do patch Exchange and other things, if they still have on-prem, right? Kind of reducing the risk, increasing the resilience of their own organization, which means you don't have to clean it up afterwards. That's definitely something. But I would also say, yes, we talk now about the critical infrastructures getting attacked, or at least the billing service of it. But we also saw that, of course, now the healthcare services in many countries, I think New Zealand just had one as well, with Waikato district getting attacked with ransomware. But we also see education, we see manufacturing. So overall, you can say, unfortunately, everyone is a target. And I think Keytron mentioned it. Sometimes the MSP is even the higher target, because through them, they can scale and attack all the customers of the MSP. So I would say the MSPs have to take their lessons learned from this Colonial Pipeline attack for their own infrastructure as well. Make sure that they have backups. The backups cannot be tampered by the attacker, because of course that's one of the first things the attackers do, right? They try to delete all the backups, uninstall all the security software, and then roll out their ransomware. And we've seen that they are using the infrastructure of the MSP. So in one case, they managed to get the weak password of the administrator of the MSP logged into the consoles, all consoles, the same password. And then they started deleting the backups. They started creating new backups to their own cloud to exfiltrate the data, because that's an easy way, right? You just spin up your own cloud.
Clever.
And then they actually used the software distribution service of the MSP to roll out the ransomware and then start it that way. So they use the automation, which we praise here, right, to make the life easier of the MSP. Unfortunately, it also makes the life easier of the attackers if you don't protect it with multi-factor authentication, zero trust, and so on. So I think first lessons learned for yourself and then for the customers.
Incredible.
Yeah, and the question mentioned marketing too, James. It said, marketing opportunity. So I'll address that because I'm a big fan of marketing people. Because they make us all look good. They're like my heroes. So I'll give them some advice. So I think you are okay with there is some marketing opportunity there, but you need to be careful because to Scott's point earlier, where he said, a lot of MSPs are just kind of, have to be on the sideline watching these big battles ensue. That's okay if you're going to take that position, but at the same time, don't market to your SMBs that, look, if you buy this new service, you don't have to worry about security and all that stuff because we're going to take care of it. So if you're going to market based on these breaches and things happening, make sure you get yourself trained up to where when something happens, you can actually provide that service and not kind of back yourself up and be like, well, it's too complex. We're just going to sit on the sidelines. You got to wait for the FBI or the Secret Service to come in. So if you're going to use it as a marketing opportunity, make sure you invest in actually building that service out so that you can actually perform it when it, if something happens.
Yeah, the cardinal sin here, I think, is overselling and under-delivering.
Yeah.
All right. Great answers, folks. Audience, thank you for these great questions. We're going to have to close the audience Q&A for now. If we didn't get to your question, we will follow up with you. But I wanted to go to our panel for their practical tips. This is something we try to do at every Acronis event, where we ask our experts to give you one solid tactical kind of takeaway from it. So Troy, why don't you start?
Yeah, so data minimization, I love this as a principle because it doesn't really cost you anything to do it for the most part. That I love the principle of only collecting what it is that you need to have as an organization. If you don't need to have someone's date of birth, then let us not collect that. And likewise, if you don't need to retain it beyond a certain period of time, let's not retain that. And I'll leave you with one comment that someone gave me before I went to Congress a few years ago. So this wasn't my quote, but someone else had a really epic quote. And they said, organizations usually look at data as an asset and they fail to look at it as a liability. And I would love organizations to look at data more as a liability insofar as there's a whole bunch of it you don't need. Like, stick to what you need, minimum of data minimization. Good job, move on. Next.
Great stuff. Let's move across the slide. Scott, how about you?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So my tip is to make the most of the Microsoft Secure Score. So a lot of the conversation today has been about Microsoft 365, and so this score is it was designed initially for end users, not for MSPs, but it can be a great tool for MSPs. So what it does, it's part of the Microsoft 365 Security Center, and it scores an organization based on how well they've configured their Microsoft Cloud environment for security. So especially high points for enabling MFA, and things like that. For MSPs, it's just a great reason to have a periodic conversation, with a customer about Microsoft 365. It's almost like a doctor's checkup, and you can make it a metric for customers. Show how much it's increased since you've started working with them, or in areas of improvement. So just a good tool to get to know.
Fantastic. Keytron, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say my tip would be to make sure you educate your people, keep them up to date on the latest attacks and things. That ranges from your end users all the way to your technical people. They have to stay educated and up to date on these things. And we all have to remember we have to sell security. So I mean, we're just like car insurance. You don't want to pay for it, you hate it, but when you run into another car, you're absolutely glad that you have it. So we have to kind of change that narrative a little bit and make it interesting and exciting, my insurance provider sent me out a little thing that says, if you keep this in your car, we can track you and your insurance will go down. So I turned that into a whole big security discussion. Well, what are you tracking and how are you tracking it? Because that made it interesting, right? So now I have this thing because that's something that's different. So I think in the industry, we need to look at ways to sell security better, make it more interesting so that people can digest it.
Love it. Candid, you want to take us home with your tip?
Yeah, I'll take it brief. So it's, of course, reduce complexity. So make sure that you integrate wherever possible, reduce the number of point solutions to have integrated solution, which still can cover it, automate it where possible, so to be efficient. And as we mentioned, practice it. Do those restores, right? To check, is your backup actually there, or is it just an empty file saying error writing file? I've seen that happening. So, I mean, you want to test that before you actually need it because all your data is encrypted. And don't try to solve everything at once. Start somewhere, right? Make your email more secure, make your backup secure. And once you have that, move to the next one and so on to gradually increase your resilience. And then hopefully you won't be the next one in the news.
Thanks for that. Thank you again to our incredible panel here. Audience, I'd ask you to stick around for just a couple more minutes. We want to give you a very quick demonstration of Acronis Cyberprotect, which is our way of delivering some capabilities for protecting Microsoft 365 environments that our MSP partners can use to protect their customers. I'm going to come back to talk about a promo and some other free resources we've got for you. So please stick around for that. And right now I'm going to hand it over to the other James for our little demo.
Hello, everyone. My name is James, and I'm one of the solutions engineers on the U.S. cloud team at Acronis. And I'm going to be providing an introduction to the Acronis Cyberprotect cloud solution as we focus on protecting Microsoft 365 environments. We all know that the threat landscape is becoming more complex. We have people working from home, using their own networks and devices with business data floating around, making it much more difficult to control. Since the pandemic, there's been a rise in cybercrime, and traditional antiviruses aren't catching everything. MSPs have been using a mix of solutions from several vendors in an attempt to fully protect their environments. To reduce that complexity and increase management efficiency, Acronis has taken our traditional data protection solution and integrated several cybersecurity and management features, resulting in our cyber protection offering. Bringing these services under a single vendor with a single solution can help with both training and implementation, not to mention cut costs and increase your margin. What you see here is an overview of the Acronis Cyber Cloud platform. On the left is a list of features and capabilities such as backup and disaster recovery, malware protection, vulnerability assessment, and patch management, etc. These features are made available through services and integrations you see as we move to the right. We have integration with tools such as ConnectWise Manage and Automate, Autotask, and most recently Kaseya. You can even use the RESTful API for any custom integrations or automation within the platform. We support over 20 different workloads, including Windows Workstation, servers, Microsoft 365, Linux, mobile devices, and various virtualization platforms, all with one solution. More and more companies have been shifting to Microsoft 365 for things like email, file sharing, collaboration, etc., even before the pandemic. But now with the massive move to work from home, this cloud-based data has increased at an even faster rate. Our solution offers cloud-to-cloud protection for Microsoft 365, making deployment, protection, recovery an easy and efficient process for these cloud workloads. The cloud-to-cloud integration is a simple process which will allow you to back up the data from Microsoft data centers directly to the Acronis data center. I'm going to go ahead and switch my share over to the Acronis console, and we'll take a look at the interface and walk through some of the common processes with the software. And I've already gotten logged into the partner level accounts in this multi-tenant, multi-tier platform. You can see I'm on the operations menu here with these different widgets that I can customize and filter to help display the relevant information. There's also a usage report or a usage view that's going to show me the data consumption both in the cloud and local, as well as the number of workloads that are protected. A list of clients here in the console, so I can create any partners or customers. You can see right here, as well as users at each level in the hierarchy. You also have your reporting that you can set up for scheduled usage reports, as well as any of those operations reports that are using those same type of widgets that we saw at the dashboard. In the settings, we're able to specify our different cloud locations to use. There's the Acronis cloud here, as well as a Google cloud or Azure cloud. You can add other cloud locations using the Acronis cyber infrastructure as kind of a gateway or a pass-through to those storage locations. I'm going to go into the clients list, and we're going to get into the management of one of my customers in the cyber protection service. And I'm going to show you the protection for 365. And this is going to take me to a similar dashboard that we just saw at the partner level, but this is the customer specific dashboard. It has all the same type of customization here. If I go down into the devices, you're going to see any of the devices, whether it's physical or virtual, workstation or server. And to add a device here, I'm going to click add at the top right. And this is going to open the panel with the different available agents for workstation, servers. You can see the virtual platforms. And as I scroll down, you're going to see Microsoft 365 for Business. This is going to initiate that cloud-to-cloud integration. It's going to redirect you to the Microsoft login page. You'll log in with the organization admin account, and that's going to start to build out that 365 environment here. And you'll see 365 show up in your list with any of the users, sites, teams. If I go into the all users here and use Mr. Tesla as an example, I can do a backup of 365 or OneDrive. These are already configured plans. If I say add a new backup plan and create one, you're going to see those details. Pretty simple here. Choose what you're backing up and the retention period on that data. And you have that same type of option for backing up of Teams and SharePoint Online. I'll show you that in just a moment. When it comes to recovery, though, if I go to recovery, I've got the different dates that the backup has ran, and I can say recover mailbox or email messages. And if it was OneDrive data, it will just recover the OneDrive files. I can go in the inbox and choose one of these emails and say show content. I can recover that, as an email back into this organization, or even cross-organization recovery. Let's go ahead and say back, and then let's go into the Teams. So building out the Teams backup is very similar to the Exchange Online or OneDrive backup. It's going to have the same type of settings here, but on the recovery is going to have team specific types of restoration for channels, entire team, email messages, or the team site. But same type of recovery options of recovering back into that same organization or group. And same with SharePoint sites. When it comes to creating the backup, you can either do an individual backup of one of these users or one of the sites or whatnot, or you can do the group backup. And that group backup is going to include all of those individual users here. And this even as part of a group backup, any newly added users is automatically going to be backed up as part of that group backup plan. So it helps with kind of scaling out that growth of the environment. If we go into the plans section, this is going to show me the cloud application backups here. And this is another way to see those different backup plans that you've created, whether it's for 365 mailboxes or Teams. You can select one of these, check the details. You can edit the plan here. You can see that there's much more to the platform than just the 365 protection that we're looking at here. But we don't have all of the time to go into all of these different items. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I do appreciate your time joining me to learn more about the Acronis Cyber Cloud platform and specific to the Microsoft 365 protection. Thank you.
Thanks for that whirlwind tour there, James. I hope our audience found that, got a little flavor of what we're doing in the way of cybersecurity and data protection tools. A nice highlight there on specifically what we're doing for Microsoft environments. Audience, very easy to schedule a much more complete demo if you'd like with one of our solutions engineers. We're going to put a link in the chat for you to schedule that. That's a really great way to kind of get a deeper dive on what we're doing. Next, I want to talk about a promotion that we're running through the end of August for our service provider partners. Basically, you can get, if you sign up now, you get unlimited Acronis hosted storage for Microsoft 365 mailboxes, OneDrives, and also Google Drives. And of course, we always encourage you to take advantage of a complimentary 30-day trial of Acronis Cyber Cloud. Kick the tires yourself, get a feel for how easy and powerful that interface is to use. Also want to talk to you about some educational materials that are free for you to download. We won't even ask for your email address to get these. The survey that Candid conducted around the globe of businesses to understand what small business requirements are, something I think you'll find insightful as you build your own services. Questionnaires is basically a sales tool to help you lead a prospect through a discussion of their cybersecurity risk posture. Basic data sheet, and then there's an ebook I wrote recently about protecting yourself and your customers from tech supply chain attacks, including a little mini framework you can use to evaluate your own posture there and explain to your customers what you're doing to protect them from those kind of attacks. Also wanted to encourage you to take advantage. One of the great benefits of being an Acronis partner is the Acronis CyberFit Academy. Our research actually shows that if you are well trained and certified through the academy, you literally sell twice as much as our partners that don't get trained up on it. I think reasons for that are pretty obvious. If you're really literate and certified on the product, you sell better and faster. Your support desk will be able to close calls, tickets more quickly and keep your customers happy, and that helps renewals. So get trained up. We've got a very flexible capability for every level of person in your organization. And you also unlock a lot of pricing and promotional advantages when you get your staff trained and certified. So please take advantage of our Academy resources there. You can register at the Acronis Partner Portal to get access to that. In closing, I'll just say, please consider donating to the Acronis Cyber Foundation. This is our nonprofit that builds schools and conducts tech training in developing countries around the world. A really worthy nonprofit cause. Closing, I'll just say thanks again for your time and attention today. Apologize for running a little long. I hope that panel made it worth your while. We will follow up with you with questions. We'll send you our checklist that our panel built and a link to the recording of the event. In the meantime, we hope to see you again at a future event. In the meantime, be safe, be well, be secure, everybody. Thanks, and have a great afternoon or evening. We'll see you soon.